The blade pressed against her throat was cold, but not as cold as the eyes of the man who held it. Serafina Cole had exactly 3 seconds to decide whether to beg for her life or spit in the face of Soul's most feared loan shark. She chose neither. Instead, she looked past the knife, past the rage, and locked eyes with the man in the corner watching everything unfold. A man whose presence made the air itself feel dangerous, whose single lifted finger stopped the blade mid-pressure, whose quiet command in Korean carried more weight than a scream, and whose dark, calculating gaze found hers in that moment, and something inside him shifted, cracked open, awakened with a violence that would consume them both. Welcome to K Fairy Tales Stories, besties. Stick around till the end because this ride is about to get wild. Trust me, your emotions aren't ready. Also, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. 24 hours earlier, Serafina had been serving coffee in a boutique cafe in Gangnam, smiling through exhaustion, pretending the bruises on her wrists were from clumsiness rather than her stepfather's creditors. She was 26, curvy in ways that made men stare and women whisper, with skin like warm amber and eyes that held storms. She refused to cry. Soul had promised her escape from her past, but debt followed blood, and her stepfather's gambling addiction had painted a target on her back she couldn't scrub off. The loan sharks found her during closing shift. 3 men in expensive suits with cheaper morals, demanding payment for money she'd never borrowed, debts she'd never signed for, consequences she'd inherit simply because her last name matched the deadbeat who'd fled to Busan. They gave her 2 weeks, then 1 week, then 3 days, and when she still couldn't produce money that didn't exist, they stopped asking nicely. That was how she ended up in the back room of a Noraebang in Itaewon, zip-tied to a chair, listening to men discuss her worth in terms of organs and opportunities. The fear was metallic in her mouth, sharp and real, but beneath it was rage, pure and bright, because she'd survived too much to die like this, unmourned in a karaoke bar that smelled like soju and desperation. Then he walked in. Kang Min-ho moved like violence wrapped in silk, 6 feet of controlled power in a black suit that probably cost more than her yearly rent. His face was all sharp angles and harder edges, beautiful in the way winter is beautiful, cold and deadly and impossible to look away from. The loan sharks straightened immediately, fear replacing their bravado, and she understood without being told that this man owned more than money, he owned fear itself. He listened to their explanation with the patience of a predator deciding which prey to consume first. His Korean was clipped, precise, each word a small blade. Then his eyes found hers, and the world stopped. She should have looked away, should have shown submission or fear or anything other than the defiant stare she gave him, but something in his gaze held her captive more securely than any rope. He studied her like she was a puzzle he'd spend lifetimes solving. The decision happened in silence. He spoke 1 word in Korean, gestured toward the door, and suddenly her debts were his, her life was his. Her future was a contract she hadn't signed but would spend months trying to understand. The loan sharks left without argument. The zip ties came off, and Kang Min-ho crouched before her, tilting her chin up with fingers that were surprisingly gentle for hands that clearly knew violence intimately. "You belong to me now," he said in perfect English, his accent barely noticeable. "Your debt is transferred. You will work for me until it's paid, or I will sell you to someone far less patient than I am. Do you understand?" She understood nothing except that survival had changed shapes again, and this new cage had eyes that saw too much and hands that hadn't hurt her yet but promised they could. "Yes," she whispered, hating how her voice shook, and he smiled, slow and dangerous and absolutely devastating. The next morning, she woke in a bedroom larger than her entire apartment, wrapped in sheets that cost more than she made in a month, with bruises bandaged and breakfast waiting on a tray beside the bed. A note in precise handwriting informed her that clothing had been provided in the closet. A doctor would arrive at noon, and she was expected in his office at 3. She ate mechanically, dressed in clothes that fit too perfectly to be coincidence, and tried not to think about how he'd known her sizes, her preferences, her weaknesses. His penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of a building in Gangnam that didn't officially exist on any map. Security was invisible but omnipresent, cameras in every corner, guards who looked like models but moved like soldiers, technology that probably cost more than small countries. She learned quickly that Kang Min-ho was more than wealthy. He was powerful in ways that made governments nervous. A man who owned construction companies and shipping routes and politicians and violence, all wrapped in the veneer of legitimacy. She met him in his office at 3 exactly. He sat behind a desk carved from black marble, reviewing documents with the focus of a surgeon, and didn't acknowledge her presence for a full minute. When he finally looked up, his expression was unreadable, but his eyes held that same intensity from the night before, like he was cataloging every detail, memorizing her in ways that felt invasive and intoxicating. "Your debt is 300 million won," he said without preamble. "At the rate we've agreed upon, you will work for me for approximately 3 years to clear it. You will live here, eat here, exist here under my protection and my rules. Disobedience will have consequences. Betrayal will have worse ones. Do you have questions?" She had 1,000 questions, but the one that mattered most fell from her lips before wisdom could stop it. "What happens after 3 years?" He leaned back, something almost like amusement flickering across his features. "After 3 years, you're free to leave, if you still want to." The way he said it suggested he knew something she didn't, some secret about the future that made freedom irrelevant. He stood, moved around the desk with predatory grace, stopped close enough that she could smell his cologne, expensive and dark and utterly masculine. "But I don't think you will want to leave, Serafina. I think 3 years from now, you'll beg me to let you stay." The arrogance should have enraged her. Instead, it sent heat pooling low in her belly, unwanted and undeniable. She lifted her chin, met his gaze with all the defiance she could muster. "You don't know anything about me." He smiled, slow and knowing and absolutely wicked. "I know you're stronger than you believe. I know you've survived things that would have broken weaker people. I know you're terrified, but you'd die before admitting it." His hand lifted, traced her jawline with the barest touch. "And I know that when you look at me, you feel it too. This thing between us that neither of us can name yet." She jerked back, heart pounding, and his hand dropped immediately, respecting the boundary even as his eyes promised he'd cross every line eventually. Her role, he explained with professional distance, would be assisting his legitimate businesses, translation work, client relations, nothing that would put her in danger or compromise her morals. She'd have access to resources, education, protection, everything except freedom. The cage would be comfortable, but it would still be a cage. Later that night, she stood on the balcony of her new room, staring out at Seoul's glittering skyline, trying to process how her life had become a Korean drama written by someone with a cruel sense of irony. The door opened behind her, and she didn't need to turn to know it was him. She'd already started recognizing his presence by the way the air changed, charged with electricity and danger, and something that felt dangerously like fate. "Can't sleep?" His voice was softer now, lacking the commanding edge from earlier, almost human. She shook her head, still not looking at him. "I keep waiting to wake up." He moved beside her, close but not touching, respecting space while eliminating distance. "This isn't a dream, Serafina. This is real. You're here, you're safe, and you're mine to protect now whether you like it or not." "I'm not yours," she said, but the words lacked conviction. He turned her to face him, one hand cupping her cheek with devastating gentleness. "Not yet," he agreed, "but you will be. And when that day comes, when you finally admit what we both know is inevitable, I'll give you everything. Safety, loyalty, devotion, the kind of love that burns worlds down and builds new ones from ash." She should have pulled away, should have maintained distance, and dignity and self-preservation. Instead, she leaned into his touch like a flower to sunlight, desperate for warmth she'd been denied too long. The following morning brought routine, and routine brought purpose. She worked in his legitimate office downtown, translating documents between English and Korean, liaising with international clients, slowly understanding that Kang Min-ho's empire was vast and complex and built on ruthless intelligence rather than simple violence. He was brilliant, she realized, watching him negotiate a shipping deal that would make millions, brilliant and strategic and absolutely merciless when necessary. But with her, he was different, gentle, patient, protective in ways that made her feel cherished rather than owned. He'd appear at her office with coffee exactly how she liked it, would drape his jacket over her shoulders when the air conditioning ran cold, would stand too close when reviewing documents and pretend not to notice how she shivered at his proximity. Small touches, brief moments, nothing inappropriate but everything intimate, building towards something she couldn't name but felt in every cell. 3 weeks in, a client meeting went wrong. The man across the table made an offer that wasn't really an offer, his eyes traveling over Serafina in ways that made her skin crawl, suggesting in crude English that she could sweeten the deal if she were more accommodating. She opened her mouth to respond professionally, but Kang Min-ho was already moving, standing with lethal calm, walking around the table with measured steps that somehow conveyed more threat than running ever could. The client never saw the hit coming. One moment he was leering, the next he was on the floor, blood streaming from his nose, Kang Min-ho standing over him with expression that could freeze hell. "She is not part of any deal," he said in Korean, his voice deadly quiet. "She is mine. Touch her again with your eyes or your thoughts or your disgusting suggestions, and I will remove pieces of you until you forget what desire feels like." The client scrambled away, and Serafina stood frozen, watching this man defend her honor with violence that should have terrified her, but instead made her feel safe for the first time in months. Later, in his car being driven back to the penthouse, he finally spoke. "I'm sorry you had to see that." His knuckles were bruised, and she reached for his hand without thinking, examining the damage with gentle fingers. "Don't apologize for protecting me," she said quietly. He tensed at her touch, then relaxed, letting her hold his hand like it was precious. "I would kill for you," he said simply, and she believed him, believed it bone deep and soul certain. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it made her feel powerful, chosen, claimed in ways that erased every insecurity she'd carried like armor. That evening, he insisted she ice his hand while he worked, and she sat beside him at his desk, their knees, touching, her fingers gentle on his bruised knuckles, his free hand playing absent-mindedly with her hair. The domesticity of it was startling. This intimacy that had nothing to do with attraction and everything to do with comfort, with belonging, with the slow building of something neither could name, but both desperately needed. A few days later, his mother arrived unannounced. She was elegant and cold, dressed in designer everything, looking at Serafina like she was a stain on expensive fabric. In rapid Korean, she demanded explanations, questioned decisions, made clear that her son dating a foreigner, especially one with debt and questionable background, was absolutely unacceptable. Serafina understood enough to feel the rejection like knives, but Kang Min-ho's response was swift and absolute. "She is mine," he said in Korean, his voice carrying complete authority. "I don't care about your approval or society's judgment. Serafina stays, or I walk away from everything, the company, the family, every obligation you've ever placed on me. Choose carefully, Mother, because I won't make this offer twice." His mother left in fury, but not before throwing one last venomous look at Serafina, promising without words that this wasn't over. Kang Min-ho pulled Serafina into his arms the moment they were alone, holding her like she might disappear. "I meant every word," he murmured against her hair. "You're not going anywhere." But someone from her past had other plans. Her stepfather found her 2 weeks later, drunk and desperate, causing a scene in the building lobby, demanding money and screaming accusations in broken English. Security couldn't remove him without creating more spectacle, and Serafina felt every carefully built piece of her new life crumbling as shame washed over her in waves. Then Kang Min-ho appeared, his presence silencing the lobby instantly, his eyes finding hers with question and promise. He listened to her stepfather's drunken demands with infinite patience, then spoke one sentence in Korean to his head of security. Within minutes, her stepfather was removed, not violently but completely, vanished into a car that would take him back to Busan with enough money to clear his immediate debts and stern warning to never contact his stepdaughter again. Kang Min-ho turned to Serafina, cupped her face, wiped away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "You don't owe him anything," he said fiercely. "Not loyalty, not money, not even acknowledgement. He's your past. I'm your future. Let me protect you from both." That night, she went to his room instead of her own, drawn by need and fear and desperate hunger for the safety only he provided. He opened the door already knowing why she'd come, his eyes dark with understanding and desire held ruthlessly in check. She stepped inside, and the door closed behind them like fate sealing, like destiny being written in real time. "I can't promise to be gentle," he warned, his voice rough. "Once I start, I won't want to stop." She reached for his face, pulled him down until their lips nearly touched. "Then don't stop," she whispered. "Don't ever stop." What happened next was tenderness wrapped in hunger, control barely maintained, every touch an exploration and a claim. He mapped her curves with reverent hands, whispered Korean endearments she didn't understand but felt deeply, made her body sing in ways she'd never imagined possible. And when they finally came together, when he buried himself deep and they moved as one, she understood why he'd said she'd beg to stay, because leaving him now would feel like losing a limb, like cutting out her own heart and expecting to survive the bleeding. After lying tangled in sheets that smelled like both of them, he traced patterns on her skin and spoke truths in the darkness. "I didn't plan to care about you," he admitted. "You were supposed to be a debt, an obligation, a transaction, but from the moment you looked at me in that room with defiance instead of fear, I was yours. Everything I am, everything I have, it's yours if you want it." She turned in his arms, kissed him with everything she felt and couldn't say. "I want it," she whispered. "I want you, all of you. The danger and the devotion and the darkness. I'm not afraid anymore." But fear found them anyway, delivered by enemies who'd been watching, waiting, calculating vulnerabilities. The attack came 3 days later during a charity gala, gunmen forcing their way into the ballroom, targeting Kang Min-ho with precision that suggested inside information. He moved instantly, shielding Serafina with his body, barking orders in Korean that sent his security into coordinated action. The firefight was brief but brutal, and when the smoke cleared, they were both alive, but she was bleeding, a graze wound across her arm that looked worse than it was. His control shattered. Kang Min-ho held her like she was breaking, his hands gentle but shaking, his voice cracked and desperate. "You can't do this to me," he said, the words tumbling out in Korean and English. "You can't make me love you and then bleed in my arms. I can't survive losing you. Do you understand? I would burn soul to ash before I let anything take you from me." She pressed her hand to his chest, felt his heart racing. "I'm okay," she promised. "I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." The hospital visit revealed the wound was superficial, but the threat was real. Someone had targeted them specifically, and Kang Min-ho's enemies were circling, smelling weakness in the form of a woman he clearly couldn't live without. He increased security to suffocating levels, assigned bodyguards to her every movement, barely let her out of his sight. The attention was overwhelming, but beneath it was love, desperate and consuming, and absolutely terrifying in its intensity. A week later, his mother returned with an ultimatum. Leave the girl, restore the family honor, marry someone appropriate, or be disowned completely. Kang. Min-ho listened with expression carved from stone, then responded with words that would echo through Seoul's elite circles for months. I choose her. I will always choose her. Your approval means nothing compared to her happiness. Disown me if you must, but I will spend every day of my life making sure Serafina knows she was worth losing everything for." His mother left in fury, but not before dropping information meant to wound. Serafina's stepfather hadn't gone to Busan. He'd gone to Kang Min-ho's competitors, selling information about routines and vulnerabilities and the woman who'd become his greatest weakness. The betrayal cut deep, but Kang Min-ho's response was immediate and ruthless. He found her stepfather within hours, and whatever happened in that meeting ensured the man would never threaten them again, though he refused to tell Serafina details, protecting her from his own darkness. The next morning, she woke to find him watching her sleep, his expression soft in ways that contrasted his reputation. "Marry me," he said simply. No preamble or poetry, just raw need. "I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other 2 months. I know you have every reason to say no. But I'm asking anyway because I can't imagine my life without you in it, and I need you to know that you're not a transaction anymore. You're everything." She sat up, heart pounding, searching his face for doubt and finding only certainty. "Why me?" she asked, needing to understand. "Why am I worth all this?" He cupped her face with both hands, kissed her forehead with devastating tenderness. "Because you see me," he said simply. "Not my money or my power or my reputation. You see the man beneath, the one who's lonely and broken and desperate for something real. You make me want to be better, softer, human again. How could I not love you?" "Yes," she whispered, laughing through tears. "Yes, I'll marry you, you impossible, intense, beautiful man." He kissed her then, deep and claiming and full of promise, and she knew whatever came next, they'd face it together, bound by something far stronger than debt or obligation or even love. They were fate written in blood and devotion, a story Soul would tell for generations, the crime lord and the woman who tamed him by refusing to fear him. The wedding happened within a week, small and private, held in a traditional hanok that Kang Min-ho owned in the hills outside Seoul. Serafina wore a custom hanbok in deep crimson and gold, the fabric whispering against her curves, her hair adorned with delicate gold pins that caught the afternoon light. She'd never felt more beautiful, more seen, more absolutely certain that she was exactly where she belonged. Kang Min-ho stood waiting for her in a traditional black hanbok, his expression carefully controlled until she appeared, and then something cracked, his eyes filling with emotion so raw it stole her breath. When they spoke their vows, mixing Korean and English, promising protection and devotion and forever, she understood that this wasn't just marriage, it was fusion. Two souls binding so completely that separation would destroy them both. His kiss at the ceremony's end was possessive and tender, claiming her before witnesses, marking her as his in ways that transcended paperwork. She kissed him back with equal fervor, and the small gathering of his most trusted people applauded, understanding they were witnessing something rare, something powerful, something that would reshape the landscape of Seoul's underground empire. The reception was intimate but luxurious, held in the Hanok's gardens where lanterns glowed like fallen stars and music drifted through the evening air. Kang Min-ho kept her close the entire night, his hand never leaving hers, his attention absolutely focused despite the important people seeking his notice. She realized with startling clarity that she'd become his priority, the center around which everything else orbited, and the responsibility of being loved that intensely was both terrifying and exhilarating. Later that night, in the bedroom prepared for them with rose petals and candlelight, he undressed her with reverent slowness, kissing every inch of newly revealed skin, whispering in Korean how beautiful she was, how precious, how absolutely his. She responded by pulling him closer, demanding more than gentleness, needing the intensity that matched her own emotions. They came together with desperate hunger, bodies moving in perfect synchronization, pleasure building until they shattered together, clinging to each other like lifelines. In the aftermath, lying tangled and breathless, he pulled her impossibly closer. "I love you," he said in Korean, then English, then Korean again, as if saying it in multiple languages made it more true. "Saranghae, I love you more than I knew was possible, more than is probably sane. You've ruined me, Serafina, made me incapable of existing without you." She kissed his chest, right over his heart. "Good," she whispered, "because you've ruined me too, and I don't want to be fixed." Their honeymoon was spent in Jeju Island, a week of stolen privacy where they existed in a bubble separate from Seoul's dangers and expectations. They walked black sand beaches at sunrise, explored volcanic caves, ate fresh seafood at tiny restaurants where no one recognized him, made love in a villa overlooking the ocean where the sound of waves provided soundtrack to their passion. For 7 perfect days, they were just Minho and Serafina, husband and wife, lovers learning each other's rhythms and dreams. But reality intruded on the 8th day. A phone call from his head of security brought darkness crashing back, tension immediately replacing relaxation. There'd been another attack on his business interests, coordinated and sophisticated, suggesting his enemies had unified under single leadership. The threat level had escalated from harassment to war, and their return to Seoul meant stepping directly into crosshairs. The flight back was tense. Kang Min-ho made calls in rapid Korean, his expression growing harder with each conversation, the dangerous crime lord replacing the gentle husband so completely it was like watching him put on armor. Serafina sat beside him, hand in his, offering silent support, understanding that this was the price of loving a man like him. Danger would always be lurking, waiting for moments of weakness. Back in Seoul, security became suffocating. Serafina couldn't leave the penthouse without armed escort, couldn't go anywhere without being tracked, couldn't breathe without someone watching. She understood the necessity, but the cage felt smaller now, more confining, and she started feeling less like a wife and more like a vulnerability someone needed to protect. The shift in dynamics made her restless, made her question where she fit in his world when danger made everything about survival. 2 weeks after returning, she made a decision that would change everything. She'd been researching while Kang Min-ho worked, using the skills she'd developed in translation to dig through records, following paper trails, and what she found made her blood run cold. The attacks weren't random. They were coordinated by someone inside his organization, someone close enough to know schedules and vulnerabilities, someone who'd been systematically dismantling his empire from within. She brought the evidence to him late one night, spreading documents across his desk while he reviewed contracts. He listened with increasing tension, his expression darkening as he absorbed her findings, and when she finished presenting her case, he sat back and looked at her with something like awe. "You found this? All of it?" She nodded, suddenly nervous. "I know I shouldn't have been digging without permission, but I couldn't just sit idle while someone destroyed everything you've built." He stood abruptly, rounded the desk, and pulled her into his arms so tightly she could barely breathe. "You're incredible," he said against her hair. "Brilliant and brave and absolutely invaluable. Do you understand what you've just done? You've given me the key to ending this war before it destroys us." She pulled back to meet his eyes. "Who is it? Who's betraying you?" His expression went cold, deadly. "My cousin," he said quietly. "The one I trusted most after you." The revelation sent shockwaves through his organization. Kang Min-ho moved with surgical precision, gathering evidence, building an airtight case, preparing to eliminate the threat permanently. Serafina watched him work, saw the ruthless strategist who'd built an empire from nothing, understood that his gentleness with her was choice, not weakness, a gift he gave her because she was precious, not because he was incapable of violence. The confrontation happened in a warehouse near the Han River, neutral ground with witnesses from allied organizations. Kang Min-ho's cousin arrived confident, unaware that his betrayal had been discovered, expecting another negotiation meeting. Instead, he found himself surrounded by allies who'd seen the evidence, who understood that treachery demanded blood payment, who looked to Kang Min-ho for judgment. The trial was brief and brutal. Evidence was presented with clinical precision, testimonies delivered with careful detail, and when Serafina was called to testify, she walked into that warehouse with her head high and her voice steady, presenting her findings with translator's clarity, watching Kang Min-ho's cousin realize his careful plans had been unraveled by the woman he'd dismissed as meaningless distraction. The verdict was unanimous, the sentence absolute, and Kang Min-ho delivered it personally with single gunshot that echoed through the warehouse like punctuation. Serafina stood witnessing her husband execute his own blood for betrayal, and she felt no horror, only grim satisfaction that justice had been served, that threats to their life had been eliminated, that she'd contributed to their survival in meaningful way. When it was over, when the warehouse emptied and they were driven home in tense silence, she expected him to be cold, distant, wrapped in the violence he'd just committed. Instead, he pulled her into his lap in the car's back seat and held her like she was oxygen. "Thank you," he whispered against her neck, "for finding the truth, for standing beside me, for not flinching when you saw what I'm capable of." She threaded her fingers through his hair, held him close. "I didn't marry half of you," she said firmly. "I married all of you, the gentleman and the killer, the lover and the crime lord. I'm not afraid of your darkness, Min-ho. I'm part of it now." The following weeks brought strange peace. Enemies scattered without unified leadership, respect for Kang Min-ho's ruthlessness reinforced, and space finally opening for them to breathe. He slowly relaxed his security measures, trusting Serafina's ability to protect herself after enrolling her in intensive self-defense training. She embraced the lessons with fierce determination, learning to fight not because she enjoyed violence, but because she refused to be liability, refused to be the weakness enemies could exploit. 3 months after the warehouse, Serafina missed her period. The realization hit during boring business dinner, nausea washing over her suddenly, her body rejecting the expensive wine she'd been sipping. She excused herself to the bathroom, gripping the counter, staring at her reflection while her mind raced through possibilities, calculating dates, understanding with crystalline clarity that this changed everything. She bought a test the next morning while Kang Min-ho was in meetings, took it in their penthouse bathroom with shaking hands, and watched 2 pink lines appear like fate manifesting. Pregnant. She was pregnant with the child of Seoul's most dangerous man, carrying life created from their desperate passion, growing someone who would inherit both her strength and his deadly capabilities. The thought was terrifying and beautiful in equal measure. Telling him required courage. She waited until evening, until they were alone in their bedroom, until he was relaxed and accessible. Then she simply handed him the test, watching his expression transform from confusion to shock to joy so pure it made her heart ache. "You're sure?" he asked, voice breaking. She nodded, and he dropped to his knees before her, pressing his face against her still flat stomach, his shoulders shaking with emotion he rarely allowed himself to show. "I'm going to be a father," he whispered in Korean, then English, then Korean again. "We're going to have a baby, our baby." Serafina stroked his hair, overwhelmed by the vulnerability of this powerful man brought low by happiness. "Yes," she said softly, "we're going to be parents. We're going to create life and protect it and give it everything we never had." He looked up at her with tears streaming down his face. "I love you," he said fiercely. "I love you so much it terrifies me, and I love this baby already, and I swear on everything I am that I will protect you both with my dying breath." The pregnancy transformed him. Kang Min-ho became even more protective, hiring additional security, insisting she rest constantly, monitoring her health with obsessive attention. He read every pregnancy book available in Korean and English, researched the best doctors, designed a nursery that looked like something from a fairy tale. His organization's business continued, but his priority had clearly shifted to the family he was building, and his people adapted, understanding that their loyalty now extended to the woman and child who'd become his world. Serafina bloomed under his devotion. Her body changed in ways that made her feel powerful rather than awkward, curves becoming more pronounced, skin glowing with health, confidence growing as she watched her husband worship every change. He touched her constantly with gentle reverence, whispered to their baby in Korean about promises and protection, made love to her with careful intensity that honored both her pleasure and the life they'd created together. 6 months into the pregnancy, complications arose. She woke one morning to pain, sharp and terrifying, blood-staining sheets, panic rising as Kang Min-ho called for immediate medical help. The rush to the hospital was blur of sirens and prayers, his hand crushing hers, his voice steady despite the fear she saw in his eyes. Doctors moved with urgent efficiency, running tests, monitoring vitals, speaking in medical terminology that meant nothing except that their baby was in danger. The diagnosis was placental abruption, serious but manageable with bed rest and careful monitoring. Serafina would need to stay hospitalized until delivery, potentially another 3 months of captivity in sterile room, separation from the home she'd built. Kang Min-ho's response was immediate and absolute. He essentially moved into the hospital, setting up office in her room, conducting business from uncomfortable chair beside her bed, refusing to leave except for meetings that demanded physical presence. Those 3 months became strange intimacy, stripped of everything except each other, forced to exist in space where his power meant nothing and vulnerability was constant companion. They talked for hours about fears and dreams, about the childhood traumas that had shaped them, about the future they wanted to build for their daughter. Yes, daughter, revealed by ultrasound that made Kang Min-ho weep openly. They played games and watched movies and held hands through contractions that came too early, through medications that made her sick, through terror that they might lose everything they'd created. But their daughter was fighter, stubborn like her mother, strong like her father, and she held on through complications and scares until finally, at 36 weeks, doctors decided delivery was safer than waiting. The C-section was scheduled for early morning, and the night before, Kang Min-ho held Serafina close, whispering promises in the darkness. "Tomorrow we meet her," he said, voice thick with emotion. "Tomorrow our family becomes complete. Tomorrow I get to hold the 2 people who saved my life and made me human again." The delivery was efficient and beautiful, and when they placed their daughter in Serafina's arms, time stopped. She was perfect, tiny and wrinkled and absolutely perfect, with shock of dark hair and features that somehow combined both parents into something entirely new. Kang Min-ho touched his daughter's hand with trembling fingers, and she gripped his finger with surprising strength, making sounds that might have been crying or might have been greeting. "She's beautiful," he whispered in Korean, tears streaming freely. "She's perfect. She's ours." Serafina kissed their daughter's forehead, then looked at her husband with love so overwhelming it felt like drowning. What should we name her? They'd discussed options for months, but in this moment, only one name felt right. "Jiwoo," he said softly. "It means wisdom and protector. She'll be wise like her mother and strong like both of us, and she'll be protected always." "Jiwoo," Serafina repeated, testing the name, feeling it settle into place like destiny. "Welcome to the world, baby girl. Your father and I have been waiting for you." The first weeks of parenthood were exhausting chaos, sleepless nights and constant feeding, learning their daughter's cries and rhythms, adapting to life transformed by tiny human who demanded everything. Kang Min-ho was surprisingly natural at fatherhood. Changing diapers with same precision, he applied to business deals, pacing floors at 3 a.m. singing Korean lullabies, looking at Ji-woo like she was miracle made flesh. Serafina watched him transform from crime lord to devoted father, saw him soften in ways she hadn't thought possible, and fell in love with him all over again. This was the life they'd built from ashes of debt and danger, family forged through violence and devotion, love that had conquered every obstacle and emerged stronger for the trials. She'd come to Seoul broken and desperate, and found instead purpose and partnership and man who loved her with intensity that would never diminish. 6 months after Jiwoo's birth, they held a traditional Doljanchi celebration, first birthday party marking the milestone. The penthouse was filled with people from both their worlds, his organization members mixing with her few friends, everyone united in celebrating the baby who represented hope and future. Jiwoo wore tiny hanbok in pink silk, smiling at everyone with her father's intensity and her mother's warmth, grabbing at the objects placed before her in traditional ceremony. When she reached for the book and the money, everyone laughed, predicting she'd be both wealthy and wise. Kang Min-ho lifted his daughter high, pure joy transforming his usually serious expression. "She's perfect," he announced to the room. "Like her mother, she's absolutely perfect." Serafina stood beside him, their family complete, their love proven through survival and sacrifice, and she knew with bone-deep certainty that this was exactly where she was meant to be. Later that night, after guests left and Jiwoo slept peacefully in her nursery, Kang Min-ho found Serafina on the balcony where this journey had really begun, where he'd first promised her safety and devotion. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, pulling her against him, and they stood watching Seoul's lights like they had countless times before. "Do you remember the first night you stood here?" he asked quietly. "When you were terrified and defiant and absolutely captivating?" She leaned back into him, smiling. "I remember thinking you were the most dangerous man I'd ever met." His laugh rumbled through his chest. "And now? Now I know you're the most devoted," she said softly. "The most loyal, the most loving. You're still dangerous, but only to people who threaten us. To me and Jiwoo, you're safety itself." He turned her to face him, cupping her face with both hands. "I love you, Serafina. I will love you until my last breath and beyond. You took a man who thought he was incapable of feeling and taught him how to be human again. You gave me purpose beyond power, gave me family beyond organization, gave me everything I never knew I needed." She kissed him deeply, pouring 3 years of love and survival into the gesture. "And you gave me life," she whispered against his lips. "You saved me from destruction and showed me that love doesn't have to be gentle to be real, that intensity can be devotion, that darkness can protect light." They stood there holding each other while Seoul glittered below and their daughter slept peacefully inside. A family built from impossible circumstances, love born from danger, and debt and desperate choices. Serafina thought about the terrified woman who'd faced a knife and met defiant gaze instead of begging, about the man who'd seen something in that defiance worth protecting, about the journey that had transformed them both into people capable of this fierce, consuming, absolutely unbreakable love. The story could have ended there, perfect and complete, but life continued unfolding in beautiful, mundane ways. Jiwoo grew into toddler, who inherited her father's intensity and her mother's warmth, who commanded rooms despite her size, who made Kang Min-ho laugh in ways that transformed him. Serafina built career as translator and consultant, becoming valuable asset to his legitimate businesses while maintaining her own identity. They bought a house in the countryside for weekends, a place where Min-ho could be just husband and father without the weight of his reputation. Years passed in accumulation of small moments, birthday parties and business victories, quiet evenings and passionate nights, the daily work of maintaining love that had been forged in crisis. They had their fights, their disagreements, their moments of frustration, but underneath everything was foundation of loyalty so absolute that temporary anger could never crack it. They'd survived too much together to let small things destroy what they'd built. When Jiwoo turned 5, Serafina discovered she was pregnant again, and the joy was different this time, less terrifying, more certain. Kang Min-ho's reaction was pure happiness, untempered by the fear that had marked their first pregnancy. They knew what to expect now, knew they could handle whatever came, knew their love was strong enough to expand and include another life. Their son was born healthy and strong 8 months later, named Tae Yang, meaning sun, because he brought warmth to every room he entered. Their family was complete now, 4 people bound by blood and choice and love that had survived every test. Kang Min-ho gradually transitioned his business to completely legitimate operations, using his considerable resources to build empire that wouldn't endanger his children. He remained powerful, remained respected, but the violence that had marked his past slowly receded, replaced by the steady work of being present father and devoted husband. On their 10th anniversary, they returned to the Hanok where they'd married, bringing Ji-woo and Tae-young with them. The children played in the gardens, while Kang Min-ho and Serafina walked the same paths they'd walked as newlyweds, older now, marked by time and parenthood and life fully lived. He pulled her close under the same tree where they'd exchanged vows, kissed her with the same intensity that had marked their beginning. 10 years, he said in Korean, then English. 10 years of being completely, utterly, absolutely yours. She smiled against his lips, touching his face with fingers that knew every angle and plane. 10 years of being completely, utterly, absolutely loved. He rested his forehead against hers. Forever isn't long enough, he whispered. I need more time than eternity to love you properly. They stood there while their children's laughter drifted through the gardens, while Seoul existed in the distance, while the future stretched before them, full of promise and possibility. Serafina thought about the debt that had brought them together, how 300 million won had seemed like insurmountable burden, how fear and desperation had driven her to a man who would change everything. That debt was long paid, erased years ago, but she'd chosen to stay anyway, chosen this life and this love and this dangerous, devoted, absolutely perfect man who'd seen her worth when she was zip-tied to a chair and bleeding. He'd promised her protection and given her kingdom, promised her safety and given her family, promised her 3 years and given her forever. The knife pressed against her throat had been beginning of story, but the ending was this, standing in garden with husband and children, whole and healed and home. She'd walked into Seoul broken and desperate, and found instead everything she never knew she needed. The love of a dangerous man, the protection of a crime lord turned devoted husband, the family built from ashes and impossibility. She'd paid her debt not in money but in loyalty, in love, in choosing him every single day, even when choosing him was hardest thing she could do. And he'd paid his debt to her in devotion, in protection, in becoming the man she needed him to be while remaining the man she'd fallen in love with. Their story would be told in Seoul for generations, the woman who tamed the untamable, the man who chose love over power, the family that shouldn't have existed but thrived anyway. It was messy and complicated and absolutely beautiful, and Serafina wouldn't change a single moment. Not the fear, not the danger, not the debt that had started everything, because all of it had led here, to this perfect moment, to this impossible love, to this life she'd built with the man who'd seen her worth in her darkest hour and refused to let her go. Thank you for watching this journey of Serafina and Min-ho. If you loved their story of danger, devotion, and a love that conquered everything, please like this video, share it with someone who loves dark romance, and subscribe to K Fairy Tales Stories for more passionate stories where love transforms lives. Drop a comment telling us your favorite moment, and don't forget to hit that notification bell so you never miss another story. Until next time, besties, keep believing that the right love can save us from even our darkest moments.